Welcome to Bible Stories. Today, we're diving into the epic narrative of the Old Testament, a journey that spans from the dawn of creation to the formation of God's chosen people. This is more than history. It's the unfolding story of God's relationship with humanity, full of dramatic moments, profound lessons, and powerful messages that still resonate today. Whether it's Adam and Eve's first steps in Eden, Moses leading his people to freedom, or King David's quest for righteousness, these stories offer deep insights into faith, obedience, and redemption. As we explore this extraordinary journey, you'll witness how God continuously worked through individuals and nations, demonstrating his faithfulness even when humanity faltered. Each story, from the victories of the prophets to the wisdom of Solomon, is a piece of the greater plan, a plan that points toward the coming of the Messiah and a promise of salvation. If you're passionate about learning the full story of God's love and commitment to humanity, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe to Bible Stories, like this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Share this journey with your family, friends, and church group so we can all walk this path of discovery together. Let's dive in and see the Old Testament like never before. In the dawn of existence, before time itself took shape, God stood alone as the eternal and sovereign being. In a majestic act of divine will, he chose to bring forth creation, fashioning the heavens and the earth, setting the stage for all that exists. This remarkable act displayed his supreme power and unmatched creativity. At the height of his creation was humanity, whom he shaped in his own image, bestowing upon them the breath of life. This unique being, made with conscious awareness and free will, was meant to enjoy closeness with the Creator. In those early days, peace and harmony flourished in the Garden of Eden, where humanity experienced an intimate relationship with God. However, even within this paradise, humanity faced a profound test. Adam and Eve, the first human beings, yielded to the cunning temptation of the serpent. The forbidden fruit, offered with promises of enlightenment, became the catalyst for humanity's fall. In their disobedience, sin entered the world, severing the pure relationship between God and humankind. This act of defiance did not only lead to Adam and Eve's own downfall, but also passed the mark of sin onto all future generations. Innocence was replaced with an awareness of good and evil, and the Garden of Eden was left behind, guarded by cherubim. This pivotal moment, documented in the Bible, captures the vulnerability of human nature and serves as a powerful reminder of the need for redemption. It hints at the coming of a Savior who would one day restore the lost communion between humanity and God. Following Adam and Eve's expulsion from Eden, the journey of humanity reveals both the complexity of human tendencies and God's unwavering commitment to restoration. As ancient societies formed, they often strayed from moral integrity, drawn to temptation and veering from righteousness. Genesis transports us to this era of moral decline, where relationships were often marred by betrayal, greed, and the relentless pursuit of power. In Genesis 6:1-3, it is written that when men began to multiply on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Lord responded, saying, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is mortal. His days shall be 120 years. Interpretations of this passage vary. This event, it is suggested, was the final affront that led God to bring about the flood. Alternatively, some interpret Genesis 6 in light of earlier chapters, where Cain's descendants are introduced in chapter 4, and Seth's lineage is detailed in chapter 5. In this view, the daughters of men could represent the ungodly descendants of Cain, while the sons of God refer to the faithful lineage of Seth. Amid this era of moral turbulence, Noah emerges as a beacon of righteousness and integrity. Described as a man who walked faithfully with God, Noah stood in stark contrast to the surrounding corruption. Son of Lamech and grandson of Methuselah, Noah, along with his wife, raised 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. God's decision to purify the earth with a flood reflects his sovereignty and justice in the face of unchecked wickedness. Yet in his mercy, God provided a means for preservation. Noah received divine instructions to build an ark, a monumental task that symbolized hope amid impending judgment. Genesis records that the ark was to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, approximately 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet tall. This immense project required faith and obedience, as Noah and his family prepared for the flood amidst widespread disbelief. Some believe the sons of God refers to angels who defied the natural order by descending to earth, marrying women, and giving rise to a hybrid race known as the Nephilim. According to the book of Jasher, Noah may have taken 5 years to construct the ark, a period during which he organized provisions for both his family and the animals that would inhabit the ark for an entire year. A miraculous harmony reigned within the ark as animals of various kinds coexisted peacefully, reflecting God's providence. When the flood began, the fountains of the deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven opened, unleashing relentless torrents that reshaped the landscape.
Genesis recounts that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. For 40 days, the ark floated on the waters, serving as a vessel of divine salvation. After the deluge, Noah sent a dove to explore the land. When it returned with an olive leaf, Noah knew the waters were receding, and life was beginning anew. He waited patiently, sending the dove again, until he was sure it was safe to disembark. Once on dry land, Noah offered sacrifices in gratitude for God's protection, and God established a covenant, symbolized by the rainbow, promising never to flood the earth again. The landscape had changed dramatically. New mountains and valleys stood as testament to the flood's power. Humanity, now reduced to Noah's family, was entrusted with repopulating the earth. The genealogies following the flood illustrate the diversity of nations that arose from Noah's sons. Shem's descendants became associated with the Semitic peoples, including the Hebrews and Arabs. Japheth's lineage spread across Europe and parts of Asia, and Ham's descendants became connected with Africa. One of the most mysterious episodes following the flood involved Noah's youngest son, Ham. After planting a vineyard, Noah drank of the wine and lay uncovered in his tent. Ham saw his father's nakedness but did not act discreetly. Instead, he informed his brothers, Shem and Japheth. This event led to a profound and lasting impact on Ham's lineage, intertwining human choice with consequences that rippled through generations. Through all of these trials and human failings, the unfolding biblical narrative continuously highlights God's desire to restore humanity and to guide them back to a life of integrity and faith. This action by Ham, though seemingly minor, revealed a deep lack of honor and respect. Rather than responding with dignity, Ham exposed his father's vulnerability by not only seeing his nakedness, but also by choosing to share the incident with his brothers in an imprudent manner. In the cultural context of that time, witnessing and exposing a father's nakedness was seen as highly dishonorable and shameful. This act symbolized a breach in family loyalty and respect. In contrast, Shem and Japheth exhibited a markedly different attitude upon hearing Ham's report. They took a garment, walked backward into the tent, and covered their father without even glancing at him. This respectful approach highlighted their decorum and reverence. upholding their father's dignity and showing deep respect for family ties and authority. When Noah awoke from his drunken state and learned of Ham's actions, he responded in a powerful and prophetic manner. He pronounced a curse, not directly upon Ham, but upon Ham's son, Canaan, saying, "Cursed be Canaan. A servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren." Genesis 9 verse 25. This curse did not affect Ham directly, but instead fell upon his descendants, particularly the lineage of Canaan. Meanwhile, Shem and Japheth received blessings from Noah. He declared, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." Genesis 9 verses 26 to 27. This blessing and curse carried profound implications in the biblical narrative that would unfold. Shem's lineage would eventually become the ancestral line of the patriarchs, including Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, central figures in Israel's history. Japheth's descendants, in turn, were associated with the nations to the north and west, symbolizing the expansion of peoples. In contrast, Ham's lineage, particularly through Canaan, would come to be linked with the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, many of whom would become adversaries of Israel. This event involving Ham went beyond merely recording Noah's moment of vulnerability. It teaches profound lessons about the significance of respect, honor, and the lasting impact of our actions. The contrast between Ham's indiscretion and the respect shown by Shem and Japheth illustrates two distinct paths, one leading to a curse and the other to a blessing. This episode also introduces a division among Noah's descendants that would later shape the relationships between the Israelites and neighboring nations. Following this, the Bible presents the account of the Tower of Babel, found in Genesis 11 verses 1 to 9. This story occurs after the flood, during a time when all humanity spoke a common language. United by their shared tongue, the people decided to build a great tower that would reach the heavens, symbolizing their ambition and desire to achieve greatness on their own terms. However, this undertaking revealed their lack of faith in God and disregard for his authority, despite his earlier promise not to destroy the earth with a flood. God had encouraged humanity to spread across the earth, but instead, they chose to consolidate their power. Some scholars suggest that the Tower of Babel might have served a dual purpose, possibly as a military defense structure. In ancient Mesopotamia, city-states often faced threats from neighboring tribes. Constructing a tall tower could have provided a strategic advantage, serving as both a lookout for approaching enemies and a fortress for protection. Thus, the tower may have symbolized both practical defense and defiance against any perceived external threat. Despite the practical purposes the builders may have had in mind, they believed they could ascend to the heavens through their own strength, challenging God's authority. In Genesis, God blessed Noah and his sons, instructing them to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Genesis 9 verse 1. But in constructing the tower, the people chose defiance over obedience. This movement was reportedly led by Nimrod, a powerful king and descendant of Noah, known in Jewish tradition as a leader who sought to turn people away from worshiping God. According to some interpretations, Nimrod may have commissioned the construction of the Tower of Babel as a way to elevate his own power and lead others into rebellion. Babel, the city known for its architectural grandeur, reflected a culture that built impressive structures, including pyramid-like temples, which were common among the Babylonians, Sumerians, and Assyrians. Observing this, God decided to intervene, understanding the need to prevent humanity from pursuing a path of unified disobedience. In an act of divine judgment, he confused their languages, causing each worker to suddenly speak a different tongue. This resulted in chaos, halting the tower's construction as the workers could no longer communicate effectively. The name Babel is derived from the Hebrew word Babel, meaning confusion, aptly describing the effect of God's intervention. This dispersion fulfilled God's original will for humanity to populate the earth. After the confusion at Babel, the Bible shifts focus to the stories of the patriarchs, pivotal figures in the unfolding of biblical history who played foundational roles in shaping God's people. Abraham, initially known as Abram, is the most central patriarch in Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions. He is revered as a key figure in humanity's relationship with God. The story of his family reveals themes of faith, promise, and the fulfillment of divine plans. Abraham and his wife, Sarah, faced a significant challenge due to Sarah's barrenness. Although God promised Abraham that he would become the father of many nations, they remained without children. In a moment of desperation, Sarah suggested that Abraham conceive a child with her Egyptian servant Hagar. In her solitude, an angel of the Lord appeared to Hagar, offering comfort and prophesying about Ishmael's future descendants. After Ishmael's birth, God reaffirmed his promise to Abraham, specifically declaring that Sarah herself would bear a son despite her advanced age. Upon hearing this, Sarah laughed, doubting the possibility, but God assured her that nothing was beyond his power. This child, Isaac, became the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. The name Isaac, meaning laughter, reflects Sarah's initial disbelief, but also the joy that would accompany his birth. However, the arrival of Isaac added complexity to the family dynamics, increasing tensions between Sarah and Hagar. Eventually, these conflicts led to the expulsion of Hagar and Ishmael. The story of Ishmael and Hagar in the wilderness illustrates the challenges of rejection and survival. In the desert, with their water depleted, Hagar faced the prospect of her son dying from thirst. Overwhelmed, she placed Ishmael under a tree, unable to watch him suffer. In this moment of despair, God intervened once more. An angel spoke to Hagar from heaven, providing reassurance and renewing God's promise of a future for Ishmael. This complex history of family, faith, and struggle offers lessons about God's faithfulness, the weight of human choices, and the lengths to which God goes to fulfill his promises. Through these stories, the Bible reveals the enduring relationship between God and his chosen people, highlighting the ways in which respect, obedience, and reverence can shape the paths of individuals and entire nations. These narratives lay the groundwork for the unfolding of God's promises throughout the scriptures. The angel approached Hagar in her moment of despair, asking her what was troubling her and urging her not to be afraid, for God had heard the cries of Ishmael. In a compassionate gesture, the angel reassured her, promising that God would make Ishmael into a great nation. Then, in a divine moment, God opened Hagar's eyes to reveal a well of water nearby. Filled with relief and gratitude, Hagar went to the well, filled her water skin, and gave Ishmael a drink, thereby saving both their lives. This intervention not only sustained them physically, but also marked God's continued presence with them. Following this divine encounter, Hagar and Ishmael settled in the desert of Paran, where Ishmael matured, developing into a skilled hunter and archer. As he grew, Hagar, recognizing the importance of family and community, found him a wife from Egypt. This period of Ishmael's life, mentioned in Genesis 21 verses 20 to 21, highlights how God was with him as he grew in strength and ability, living a life of self-reliance in the wilderness. Ishmael's descendants would later form various Arab tribes, fulfilling the promise made by God to Hagar. Meanwhile, the promises God made to Isaac were also significant and deeply intertwined with the unfolding history of the people of Israel. God's covenant with Isaac established that his descendants would inherit the promised land and become a great nation, a promise that holds central importance in Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions. These promises emphasized the formation of Israel as a people and underscored the continuation of God's revelation throughout the Old Testament. At 40 years of age, Isaac married Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, in a union guided by divine purpose. However, the couple faced a difficult challenge. Rebekah's struggle with infertility weighed heavily on her heart. In an act of faith, Isaac prayed earnestly to God on behalf of his wife, trusting that divine intervention would provide them with the blessing of children. God answered Isaac's prayer, and Rebekah conceived. However, during her pregnancy, Rebekah experienced an unusual sensation as the babies moved within her, causing her great concern. Troubled, she sought the Lord for understanding, asking, "Why is this happening to me?" Genesis 25 verse 22. God responded, revealing to her that she carried two nations within her womb and foretelling that the older child would serve the younger, a reversal of the traditional firstborn's role. This prophecy marked the beginning of God's plan for Esau and Jacob, even before their birth. When the time came, Rebekah gave birth to twins. Esau, the firstborn, emerged with a striking red complexion and was covered in hair, a characteristic that distinguished him. Moments later, Jacob followed, grasping Esau's heel as if to symbolize the struggle that would define their relationship. As the brothers grew, they developed distinct personalities. Esau became a skilled hunter and was favored by Isaac, while Jacob preferred the quieter life among the tents and grew closer to Rebekah. Sensing his time on earth drawing to an end, Isaac desired to bestow a blessing on Esau, his eldest son. Yet, Rebekah, recalling God's prophecy, understood that the blessing was meant for Jacob. In a decisive moment, Rebekah devised a plan to ensure that Jacob received the blessing. While Esau went hunting to prepare a meal for Isaac, Rebekah instructed Jacob to bring 2 young goats from the flock. She prepared Isaac's favorite dish and covered Jacob's arms with goat skins to mimic Esau's hairiness. Initially hesitant, Jacob trusted his mother's guidance and presented himself to Isaac disguised as Esau. In his old age, Isaac was blind and easily deceived. He gave Jacob the blessing intended for Esau, promising him prosperity and dominion over his brothers. When Esau returned and discovered what had happened, he was overcome with anger and threatened Jacob's life. Fearing for Jacob's safety, Rebekah advised him to flee to her brother Laban's house until Esau's fury subsided. This marked the beginning of Jacob's journey, a path that would lead him through trials and encounters, ultimately shaping the future of Israel. On his way to Haran, Jacob paused to rest, using a stone as a pillow. That night, he experienced an extraordinary dream in which he saw a ladder reaching from earth to heaven, with angels ascending and descending upon it. This vision symbolized an open connection between God and humanity, illustrating divine communication and God's presence. In the dream, God appeared at the top of the ladder and spoke to Jacob, reaffirming the promises made to Abraham and Isaac. He assured Jacob that his descendants would be numerous, spreading across the earth and blessed. God also promised to be with Jacob wherever he went, providing protection and eventually bringing him back to the land of his fathers. When Jacob awoke, he recognized the sacred nature of the place, declaring, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." Genesis 28 verse 16. In acknowledgement of the divine encounter, Jacob set up the stone as a memorial, consecrating it with oil and naming the place Bethel, meaning house of God. Jacob's journey continued, and one day, near a well, he encountered a group of shepherds. He asked them where they were from, and they replied, "We are from Haran." Eager for news of his family, Jacob inquired about Laban, the grandson of Nahor and Abraham's brother. The shepherds confirmed they knew him and added that Rachel, Laban's daughter, was coming with her sheep. Filled with emotion, Jacob approached, removed the stone from the well's mouth, and watered Laban's flock. Upon meeting Rachel, he kissed her and wept with joy, recognizing the deep connection they shared. Rachel, in turn, hurried to inform her father of Jacob's arrival. Upon hearing the news, Laban rushed to greet Jacob, embracing him warmly. Jacob recounted his journey, and Laban welcomed him with open arms, offering hospitality. After a month of living with Laban, Jacob, eager to contribute, proposed working for Laban. Attracted to Rachel, Laban's younger daughter, Jacob offered to work 7 years in exchange for her hand in marriage. Laban agreed, and Jacob dedicated himself to the work, motivated by his love for Rachel. However, at the end of the 7 years, Laban deceived Jacob by substituting Leah, his elder daughter, on the wedding night. In the morning, Jacob discovered the deception and confronted Laban. Laban explained that it was customary to marry off the elder daughter before the younger. He then offered Rachel's hand in marriage on the condition that Jacob work another 7 years. Driven by love and resilience, Jacob accepted, marking a pivotal moment in his life. This commitment and perseverance shaped his family and ultimately influenced the course of Israel's history. Now married to both Leah and Rachel, Jacob's family grew, and he prospered in his work with Laban's flocks. God blessed Jacob's efforts, and his livestock multiplied, increasing his wealth. Yet, as Jacob's prosperity grew, tensions with Laban escalated. Realizing the need for independence and heeding God's call to return to his homeland, Jacob expressed his desire to leave. Despite Laban's attempts to persuade him to stay, Jacob, guided by divine direction, remained resolute. Jacob set out for Canaan with his wives, children, and flocks. However, the thought of reuniting with Esau filled him with apprehension. Fearing Esau's lingering anger, Jacob sent a caravan of gifts, including livestock and valuable goods, as a peace offering. On the night before their meeting, Jacob gathered his family and had them cross the Jabbok River while he remained on the other side, alone in deep contemplation. In this moment of solitude, a mysterious figure appeared, engaging Jacob in an intense wrestling match that lasted until dawn. The struggle symbolized the trials Jacob had faced throughout his life. At the peak of the struggle, the figure touched Jacob's hip, dislocating it, but Jacob refused to relent. Determined, he demanded a blessing from his mysterious opponent. When asked for his name, Jacob responded, marking a profound moment in his life's journey. Upon hearing Jacob's response, the mysterious figure declared, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." Genesis 32, verse 28. This name change marked a profound transformation in Jacob's life, symbolizing a new spiritual identity and a deep shift in his character. No longer simply Jacob, he was now called Israel, a name that signified his resilience and his new purpose. Jacob realized the significance of this encounter, understanding that he had, in a sense, wrestled with God himself. He named the place Peniel, meaning face of God, as he marveled at the fact that he had seen God face to face and had survived. This wrestling with God not only gave Jacob a new name, but also marked the beginning of a new chapter in his journey of faith. He emerged with a renewed sense of purpose and trust in God, but he also bore a physical reminder of the encounter, a limp from his displaced hip. At dawn, as he continued on his journey, Jacob moved forward, changed in body and spirit, aware that he was now walking a path marked by divine purpose. As he approached the momentous meeting with his brother Esau, the tension was almost tangible. Years earlier, Esau had vowed to kill Jacob for taking his blessing, and Jacob was fully aware of the danger he might face. Humbly, he took careful measures to show respect and a desire for reconciliation, bowing 7 times as he approached his brother. This gesture of humility reflected Jacob's genuine wish to mend their relationship and seek Esau's forgiveness. To his surprise, Esau ran to meet him, embracing Jacob warmly and weeping. It was a powerful moment of forgiveness and brotherly love, a long-awaited reconciliation that defied the bitterness of the past. After reconciling, the brothers chose to go their separate ways. Jacob settled in Sukkot, where he built a home and shelters for his livestock. This period of stability represented both material security and the peace he had achieved after years of wandering and conflict. Jacob had 12 sons, each of whom would go on to lead one of the 12 tribes of Israel, fulfilling a promise that would shape the destiny of a people. Among Jacob's sons, Joseph held a special place as the beloved son of Jacob and Rachel. This favoritism sparked jealousy among his brothers, especially as Joseph began to have dreams that hinted at his future authority over them. These dreams, which suggested that his brothers would one day bow to him, only deepened their resentment. When Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were tending the flocks far from home, they seized the opportunity to act on their envy. Initially, they plotted to kill him, but Reuben, the eldest, convinced them to throw Joseph into a cistern, intending to rescue him later. While Joseph was in the cistern, a caravan of Ishmaelite merchants passed by. Judah, one of the brothers, suggested they sell Joseph to the merchants rather than harm him directly. The brothers agreed, and Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver, taken to Egypt, and purchased by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer and captain of Pharaoh's guard. Potiphar held a high position, likely earning his status through loyalty and competence in Pharaoh's court. Joseph soon proved himself in Potiphar's household, displaying wisdom and integrity that led to his promotion. Entrusted with managing Potiphar's estate, Joseph's presence brought prosperity to the household. However, this success met a significant challenge when Potiphar's wife attempted to seduce Joseph. Joseph, steadfast in his moral principles, refused her advances. Angered by his rejection, Potiphar's wife falsely accused him of attempted assault, leading to Joseph's imprisonment. Despite the injustice, Joseph continued to demonstrate his abilities and faithfulness even in prison. There, he encountered Pharaoh's chief, cupbearer, and baker, who had troubling dreams they could not interpret. Seeing their distress, Joseph offered to interpret the dreams. The chief cupbearer's dream involved a vine with 3 branches that blossomed and produced grapes. Joseph interpreted this as a sign of restoration, telling the cupbearer that he would be returned to his position within 3 days. The baker's dream, however, foreshadowed a grim fate, predicting his execution in 3 days. Both interpretations proved accurate, but although the cupbearer promised to speak of Joseph to Pharaoh, he forgot his promise, leaving Joseph to endure further time in prison. Eventually, Pharaoh himself had a perplexing dream that none of his advisors could interpret. It was then that the cupbearer remembered Joseph's gift and recommended him to Pharaoh. Joseph was summoned and brought before Pharaoh, marking a turning point in his life. Standing in the royal court, he revealed that Pharaoh's dream was a divine message about the future. Egypt would experience 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of devastating famine. Recognizing Joseph's wisdom, Pharaoh appointed him as governor of Egypt, entrusting him with the task of preparing the land for the coming hardship. Under Joseph's leadership, Egypt stored grain during the years of plenty, ensuring that the nation could withstand the famine. To solidify Joseph's authority, Pharaoh arranged his marriage to Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar. This union strengthened Joseph's position and helped ease any lingering tensions from the earlier incident with Potiphar's wife. Joseph's administrative acumen safeguarded Egypt during the famine, and his leadership would ultimately extend beyond Egypt's borders. As the famine spread, even Canaan suffered. Hearing of the stored grain in Egypt, Jacob sent his sons to buy food. Unaware of Joseph's role in Egypt, the brothers found themselves pleading before him. Recognizing his brothers, Joseph tested their character before revealing his identity, an emotional reunion that led to the relocation of Jacob's family to Egypt. They settled in Goshen, a fertile region where they could survive the famine, thus preserving their family line and fulfilling the promise God had made to Abraham. The saga of the patriarchs would ultimately set the stage for the emergence of Moses and the exodus of the Israelites. Years after Jacob's descendants settled in Egypt, their numbers multiplied, drawing the attention of a new pharaoh who enslaved them. Fearing their growing population, he decreed that all newborn Hebrew boys be killed. During this time of oppression, Moses was born. His mother, Jochebed, hid him for 3 months, and when she could no longer keep him safe, she placed him in a basket and set him adrift on the Nile. Pharaoh's daughter discovered the child and, moved with compassion, chose to adopt him. Miriam, Moses' sister, offered to find a Hebrew woman to nurse him, allowing Jochebed to care for her son under Pharaoh's protection. Moses grew up in the Egyptian court, receiving a privileged education and exposure to the complexities of Egyptian society, yet he never forgot his heritage. As an adult, Moses witnessed the suffering of his people and, in a moment of anger, killed an Egyptian who was mistreating a Hebrew slave. Fearing retribution, he fled to the desert of Midian, where he found refuge with Jethro, a local priest. Moses married Jethro's daughter, Zipporah, and adopted a life as a shepherd. This simpler, quieter life was a stark contrast to the luxury he had known, but it prepared him for the mission God had for him. After 40 years, Moses had a transformative encounter that would change the course of his life and the destiny of his people. On Mount Horeb, Moses experienced a life-altering encounter with God. He saw a bush engulfed in flames, yet miraculously unconsumed. Drawn by this sight, Moses approached, and from within the fire, he heard God's voice. God called Moses to the daunting task of leading the Israelites out of their bondage in Egypt. Initially, Moses hesitated, feeling unworthy and inadequate for such a monumental mission. However, God assured him, revealing himself as I am, the God of his ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. With this divine encouragement, Moses accepted the calling, and, accompanied by his brother Aaron, returned to Egypt to confront Pharaoh with a demand to free the Hebrew people. When Moses and Aaron stood before Pharaoh, requesting the release of the Israelites, Pharaoh refused defiantly. In response to Pharaoh's obstinance, God unleashed a sequence of plagues upon Egypt, each demonstrating his supreme power. The first plague turned the waters of the Nile to blood, followed by plagues of frogs, gnats, flies, disease upon the livestock, painful boils, destructive hail, a locust swarm, and an enveloping darkness. Despite the devastation these plagues brought, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. It was the 10th and final plague, the death of every firstborn in Egypt, that finally broke Pharaoh's resistance. Before the arrival of this final plague, God instructed the Israelites to mark their doorposts with the blood of a sacrificed lamb. On the appointed night, the angel of death would pass over each home marked with lamb's blood, sparing the lives within. At midnight, an eerie stillness covered the land, broken only by the anguished cries echoing throughout Egypt. In every home untouched by the blood, the firstborn perished, including Pharaoh's own child. The grief was overwhelming, reaching from the grandeur of Pharaoh's palace to the humblest household. Stricken with sorrow, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron, urgently commanding them to take the Israelites and depart. At last, the long-oppressed Israelites, numbering in the millions, embarked on their journey toward freedom. Moses led them out of Egypt, fulfilling God's plan of liberation. However, freedom brought its own set of challenges. In the wilderness, the Israelites faced numerous hardships, from scarcity of food and water to confrontations with hostile nations. In his providence, God provided manna from heaven and brought water from a rock to sustain them. During this time, Moses ascended Mount Sinai, where he received the 10 Commandments and a comprehensive set of laws intended to guide the people in their covenant relationship with God. Moses' leadership was not only political, but also deeply spiritual. As he guided God's chosen people toward the Promised Land, he also imparted to them a vision of faithfulness and obedience. One of the most remarkable miracles performed under Moses' leadership was the parting of the Red Sea. When the Israelites found themselves trapped between the sea and the approaching Egyptian army, desperation filled their hearts. In that critical moment, God instructed Moses to raise his staff over the waters. As he did so, the sea parted, creating walls of water on either side and a dry path for the Israelites to cross. Once the Israelites had safely passed, the waters returned to their place, drowning the pursuing Egyptian forces. This miraculous event marked the Israelites' definitive escape from Egyptian slavery and oppression. Following their crossing of the Red Sea, the Israelites faced yet another trial at Marah, where the waters were bitter and undrinkable. Parched and disheartened, the people grumbled against Moses. In response, God instructed Moses to throw a specific piece of wood into the water, transforming it into a fresh, drinkable source. This act not only quenched their thirst, but symbolized God's ability to turn bitter situations into moments of renewal and hope. In the desert of Meribah, the people again voiced their frustration over a lack of water. This time, God directed Moses to speak to a rock, promising that water would flow. But, weary of the people's constant complaints, Moses struck the rock with his staff instead of speaking to it as instructed. Water did pour forth, but Moses' disobedience cost him dearly. God rebuked him, saying, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." Numbers 20:12. Thus, Moses was denied entry into the Promised Land, a sobering reminder of the importance of unwavering trust and obedience. Moses' life ended in a uniquely profound way. God led him up Mount Nebo, from where he could view the entire Promised Land stretching before him. The land promised to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God allowed Moses to see the land, saying, "I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it." Deuteronomy 34. There, Moses died according to God's word, and God himself buried him in a valley. To this day, the exact location of his grave remains unknown. Moses' death marked the end of an era, but his legacy as a leader and lawgiver remained foundational for the Israelites, and his successor, Joshua, would carry forth the mission. Following Moses' death, Joshua, a devout disciple and warrior, took on the mantle of leadership. Chosen by God, he was tasked with leading the Israelites across the Jordan River into the Promised Land. Before entering Canaan, Joshua sent 12 spies to scout the land. Although most returned with fearful reports of fortified cities and formidable giants, Joshua and Caleb remained confident, believing in God's promise. Their steadfast faith became a critical influence, and while others doubted, they trusted that God would deliver the land into their hands. However, due to the widespread disbelief among the Israelites, God decreed that the current generation would not enter the Promised Land. As a result, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Under Joshua's leadership, the conquest of Canaan eventually began, with significant victories, including the miraculous fall of Jericho's mighty walls. These triumphs symbolized the fulfillment of God's promises, affirming Joshua's role as the divinely chosen leader and reinforcing the people's trust in God's guidance. With Joshua's leadership, the Israelites gradually claimed the Promised Land, a process marked by epic battles and unwavering faith. This conquest not only fulfilled the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but also established Israel's identity as God's chosen people. This era highlighted the importance of faith, obedience, and trust in God's power to overcome insurmountable challenges. After securing the Promised Land, Israel entered the period of the Judges, a time marked by repeated cycles of faithfulness, rebellion, oppression, repentance, and deliverance. The people often fell into idolatry, disobeying God's commandments, which led to oppression by neighboring nations. In his mercy, God raised judges to deliver them from their plight and guide them back to the path of righteousness. These judges, inspired by the Holy Spirit, played critical roles during crises, leading the people to freedom and renewed faith. One of the most notable judges was Gideon. Though initially hesitant, Gideon was chosen by God to lead the Israelites against the Midianites. In a profound act of faith, Gideon followed God's instructions to drastically reduce his army, demonstrating that their victory would come through divine intervention rather than sheer numbers. With only a small group of men, Gideon's forces achieved a remarkable victory using a clever strategy involving torches and clay jars. Under the cover of night, Gideon led a small band of Israelite soldiers in a remarkable attack against the Midianites, who had been oppressing Israel. Using an ingenious strategy that involved torches and clay jars, Gideon's troops caused chaos among the enemy camp, leading to a decisive victory. His success was nothing short of miraculous, as he ruled Israel as a judge for 40 years, bringing peace and stability during his leadership. Samson's unmatched strength and Delilah's betrayal. Another significant judge of Israel was Samson, a man renowned for his supernatural strength. His birth came as a divine promise to his mother, who was barren, and he was consecrated as a Nazirite from birth, vowing to abstain from wine and maintain purity. The Spirit of the Lord endowed him with incredible physical strength, enabling him to perform mighty feats against Israel's enemies. Despite his strength, Samson's emotional weaknesses led him into a romantic entanglement with Delilah, a Philistine woman. Driven by her loyalty to her people and enticed by the bribe offered by the Philistine leaders, Delilah sought to discover the secret of Samson's strength. After multiple unsuccessful attempts to coax the truth from him, Samson finally revealed that his strength was tied to his Nazirite vow, specifically to the fact that his hair had never been cut. Armed with this knowledge, Delilah waited until Samson was asleep and then cut his hair, rendering him powerless. Captured by the Philistines, Samson was blinded and bound in chains. In a final act of faith, he prayed to God, asking for strength one last time. God granted his request, and Samson pulled down the pillars of the Philistine temple, sacrificing himself in the process, but destroying his enemies and bringing about a significant victory for Israel. Deborah, the judge and prophetess. Deborah stands out as a unique and remarkable figure in Israel's history, as she was the only female judge recorded in the Bible. Serving as both a judge and a prophetess, she guided Israel during a time of great oppression by the Canaanites. Called by God, Deborah summoned Barak, an Israelite military leader, instructing him to rally Israel's forces to combat the Canaanite commander, Sisera. Deborah prophesied victory for Israel, but she also revealed that the glory for Sisera's defeat would go to a woman. After the battle, Sisera fled and sought refuge in the tent of Jael, a Kenite woman. Seizing the opportunity, Jael killed him by driving a tent peg through his temple while he slept, fulfilling Deborah's prophecy. This victory brought Israel relief from Canaanite oppression, and Deborah's triumph was celebrated in a song of praise, known as the Song of Deborah, recorded in Judges 5. Samuel, the last judge and the first prophet of Israel's monarchy. The period of the judges culminated with Samuel, who served as both a prophet and judge. Samuel's story began with his mother, Hannah, who fervently prayed for a child, vowing to dedicate him to the Lord's service if her prayer was answered. God blessed Hannah with a son, and true to her promise, she gave Samuel to the Lord's work at the sanctuary in Shiloh, where he grew under the guidance of the priest Eli. From a young age, Samuel was called by God to serve as a prophet, and he played a crucial role in Israel's transition from a system of judges to a monarchy, anointing both Saul and David as kings. Samuel's life marked the end of the period of the judges and the beginning of a new era. Each judge before him had helped guide Israel through times of crisis, reaffirming the need for faith, obedience, and trust in God. Samuel's leadership laid the foundation for a new phase in Israel's history, as he provided spiritual guidance during a time of national transformation. The transition to monarchy, Israel's first kings. The period of the judges led Israel to a desire for a king, as they observed that the surrounding nations were governed by monarchs. Although God was their ultimate ruler, the people's request for a human king reflected a struggle with fully trusting in divine leadership. Respecting their choice, God allowed Israel to establish a monarchy, and Samuel anointed Saul as Israel's first king. Saul's reign included notable military victories, such as his success against the Amalekites, but his tenure was also marked by acts of disobedience. Ultimately, Saul's inability to follow God's commands led to his rejection as king. God then directed Samuel to anoint a new king, David, a young shepherd from Bethlehem and the youngest son of Jesse. When Samuel arrived to anoint the next king, David's older brothers were presented first, but God saw something special in David's heart. Though he seemed an unlikely choice, God looked beyond his outward appearance and chose him for his faithfulness and courage. From that moment, David was given a divine purpose that would guide him to Israel's throne. David's rise and Goliath's defeat. David's journey took a significant turn when the Philistines gathered to challenge Israel, led by their giant champion, Goliath. Goliath taunted the Israelites, mocking their faith and daring them to send a warrior to face him in single combat. Hearing Goliath's taunts, David volunteered to fight, armed only with a sling and 5 smooth stones. Relying on his faith and his past experiences defending his sheep from wild animals, David confronted Goliath with courage. With a single stone, he struck Goliath in the forehead, defeating the giant and proving that true victory lies in faith in God. David's trials under King Saul and his friendship with Jonathan. David's popularity soared after his victory over Goliath, but his success ignited envy in King Saul. When the people praised David, singing, "Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands." 1 Samuel 18 verse 7. Saul became increasingly suspicious and hostile. His jealousy led him to make several attempts on David's life, even as David served him faithfully, playing the harp to soothe Saul's troubled spirit. Saul's efforts to kill David were relentless, yet God protected David each time. During this period, David formed a deep friendship with Saul's son, Jonathan. Despite knowing that David was destined to be king, Jonathan's loyalty to him was unwavering. Jonathan warned David of Saul's intentions and even helped him escape from danger. This bond between David and Jonathan became a model of devotion and selflessness. Tragically, both Saul and Jonathan were later killed in battle against the Philistines on Mount Gilboa. David mourned their deaths deeply, particularly grieving the loss of Jonathan, whose love and loyalty had been a source of great strength. David's reign and the bringing of the ark to Jerusalem. With Saul's death, David did not immediately seize the throne. Instead, he sought God's guidance and waited for the right time. Eventually, David was crowned king, ushering in a period of stability and territorial expansion. Among his significant achievements as king was bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, the new capital. The Ark, which contained the tablets of the Ten Commandments, manna, and Aaron's staff, symbolized God's presence among the people. The Ark had been in Kiriath Jearim since the Philistines had captured it, but David longed to bring it to Jerusalem, uniting the nation's worship and reaffirming the centrality of God in Israel's life. David celebrated this event with great joy, dancing before the ark in humility and devotion. This act of worship marked a spiritual milestone in his reign, emphasizing the role of faith in the nation's identity. David's downfall and redemption. However, even a king as devoted as David was not immune to temptation. At the peak of his reign, he encountered Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, one of his most loyal warriors. Overcome by desire, David committed adultery with her, and when Bathsheba became pregnant, he attempted to cover up his actions by arranging for Uriah to be placed in the front lines of battle, where he was killed. This act of betrayal and deceit brought great turmoil to David's life. The prophet Nathan confronted David, condemning his actions and revealing the depth of his sin. In a moment of deep remorse, David repented, seeking forgiveness from God. Though he faced consequences, including family strife and rebellion, David's repentance demonstrated the power of God's grace and the possibility of redemption. David's journey from shepherd to king, with all its triumphs and failures, serves as a testament to the importance of faith, humility, and reliance on God's guidance. After committing adultery with Bathsheba, David attempted to conceal his sin by bringing her husband, Uriah, back from the battlefield. He hoped Uriah would sleep with his wife, making it seem that the child was his. However, Uriah, a man of integrity and loyalty, refused to indulge in the comforts of home while his fellow soldiers were fighting. Despite David's attempts, Uriah's resolve did not waver. Seeing no other way, David resorted to a desperate act. He ordered Uriah to be placed in the front lines, where the battle was fiercest, knowing it would lead to his death. Following Uriah's death, David took Bathsheba as his wife. However, his actions did not go unnoticed by God. The prophet Nathan soon came to confront David, using a parable to reveal the depth of his wrongdoing. Upon hearing the parable and realizing his guilt, David was overcome with remorse. In Psalm 51, David poured out his heart, pleading, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. Blot out my transgressions according to your great compassion." Psalm 51 verse 1. Although God forgave David, the consequences of his sin were severe. The child born from the affair passed away, and David's household became plagued with conflicts, betrayals, and instability. As David aged and his strength waned, he recognized the time had come to pass on the leadership of Israel. This pivotal moment is recorded in 1 Kings 2, where David summoned his son Solomon, who would succeed him. He reminded Solomon of the covenant God had established with their lineage and the divine promise that one of David's descendants would reign over Israel forever. David emphasized the weight of this responsibility, urging Solomon to uphold God's laws and to remain faithful. David's death is recorded in 1 Kings, where it notes he passed at an old age after a lengthy reign. Before he died, David gave Solomon final instructions on how to govern the kingdom and deal with certain individuals within Israel. Upon David's passing, Solomon's ascent to the throne was not without challenge. Adonijah, another of David's sons, attempted to seize the throne. However, the intervention of the prophet Nathan and Bathsheba secured Solomon's position as the rightful king. In 1 Chronicles 22, God revealed to David that Solomon would be the one to build the temple, saying, "You will have a son who will be a man of peace. His name will be Solomon, and I will grant Israel peace and quiet during his reign." The reign of Solomon and his God-given wisdom. Solomon's rule began with a focus on establishing stability and unity in the kingdom. Known for his profound wisdom, Solomon sought divine guidance early in his reign. In a significant event recorded in 1 Kings 3, God appeared to Solomon in a dream, offering him anything he desired. In humility, Solomon requested wisdom to govern Israel with justice and discernment. Pleased by Solomon's request for wisdom over wealth or power, God granted him not only exceptional wisdom, but also unmatched riches and honor. One of the most famous stories that exemplifies Solomon's wisdom is the judgment of the two mothers. Two women came before the king, each claiming to be the mother of the same child. Solomon proposed to cut the child in half, giving each woman a portion. The true mother immediately begged to give up her claim to save her child, while the other woman agreed to the division. Solomon then declared that the real mother was the one who would rather lose her child than see him harmed. This judgment solidified Solomon's reputation as a wise and discerning ruler. Beyond his wisdom, Solomon is renowned for his greatest accomplishment, the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. This monumental project became the spiritual center of Israel, symbolizing God's continual presence among his people. Though David had desired to build the temple, it was Solomon who fulfilled the vision, devoting years to its construction. The temple's grandeur not only represented Solomon's devotion to God, but also reflected the prosperity and strength of Israel during his reign. The structure was adorned with cedar from Lebanon and overlaid with pure gold, demonstrating the reverence and devotion with which it was built. The temple's location on Mount Moriah held deep spiritual significance, as it was where Abraham had shown his faith by being willing to sacrifice his son, Isaac. The construction of the temple on this sacred ground connected Israel's heritage with God's ongoing relationship with his people. The temple became a focal point for Israel's worship, embodying their unity and dedication to God. Solomon's international alliances and his downfall. In addition to his spiritual contributions, Solomon fostered international alliances and established trade relationships, strengthening Israel's influence. One notable example is the visit of the Queen of Sheba, as recorded in 1 Kings 10 and 2 Chronicles 9. The queen traveled to Jerusalem with a grand entourage, bringing valuable gifts and testing Solomon's wisdom with challenging questions. Impressed by his answers, she praised Solomon's wisdom and his ability to govern with justice. However, despite his wisdom and achievements, Solomon was not without fault. His marriages to foreign women ultimately led him to compromise his faith. Recorded in 1 Kings 11, Solomon's involvement with numerous foreign wives opened the door to cultural and religious influences that were against God's commands. He began to tolerate idol worship and even built altars for foreign gods such as Ashtoreth and Molech. This departure from his devotion to God provoked God's anger, and as a consequence, adversaries arose against Solomon, including Jeroboam, who would later lead the northern tribes in rebellion. The end of Solomon's reign and the division of Israel. Solomon's reign, marked by unparalleled wisdom and prosperity, eventually ended in a mixture of glory and decline. While he had strengthened Israel through his alliances, construction projects, and administration, his policies also placed a heavy burden on the people. The high taxes and forced labor required to sustain Solomon's kingdom led to growing discontent among the tribes. The people who had once revered Solomon for his wisdom began to feel the weight of his rule. After Solomon's death, his son Rehoboam ascended the throne. The people, burdened by years of heavy labor and taxes, appealed to Rehoboam for relief. When he consulted his advisors, the elder counselors urged him to lighten the people's load to gain their loyalty. However, the younger advisors encouraged him to impose even stricter demands. Choosing the harsher approach, Rehoboam increased the burdens, inciting anger among the northern tribes. The rebellion that followed, led by Jeroboam, resulted in a divided kingdom. The 10 northern tribes broke away, forming the northern kingdom of Israel under Jeroboam's leadership, while the tribes of Judah and Benjamin remained loyal to Rehoboam, forming the southern kingdom of Judah. Thus, Solomon's once unified kingdom fractured, leading to centuries of conflict, division, and eventual downfall. Solomon's reign, known for its wisdom, wealth, and grandeur, ultimately left a complex legacy. While he brought prosperity and established Israel as a prominent nation, his later years' compromises and excesses planted the seeds of division. The divided kingdom that followed would struggle with internal strife, turning away from the unified worship of God and facing numerous challenges. Solomon's story serves as a reminder that true wisdom lies in consistent faithfulness, and that even the most prosperous kingdoms are vulnerable to the consequences of straying from God's commands. Rehoboam's refusal to heed the pleas of the people marked the end of a unified Israel and ushered in a period of strife and division. The kingdom, once strong under David and Solomon, split into two. The northern tribes, unable to endure Rehoboam's oppressive policies, broke away under the leadership of Jeroboam and formed the independent kingdom of Israel, often referred to as simply Israel. This pivotal moment was a result of deep-seated resentment toward Rehoboam's governance, as he failed to address the concerns of the people, leading Jeroboam to spearhead a new, separate rule. In response to the secession, Rehoboam assembled an army, preparing to forcefully reunify the two kingdoms. However, God intervened, sending a message that forbade the southern tribes from fighting their northern brethren. Through the prophet, God made it clear that this division was part of his sovereign plan and had unfolded according to his divine will. This event is captured in 1 Kings 12 verse 24, underscoring that God was guiding Israel's destiny even through this fragmentation. Jeroboam, now ruling the northern kingdom, quickly became concerned that his people might gravitate back to Jerusalem for worship, thus undermining his authority. In a move that would prove disastrous, he established alternative worship sites in Bethel and Dan, complete with golden calves to prevent the people from returning to the temple in Jerusalem. This decision not only deepened the political divide between the two kingdoms, but also introduced a cycle of idolatry in the north, leading the people away from the true worship of God. Despite a warning from the prophet Ahijah, who promised Jeroboam a lasting dynasty if he remained faithful to God's commandments, Jeroboam chose to disregard divine guidance. This disobedience set the northern kingdom on a path of rebellion against God, bringing judgment upon Jeroboam and his household. Meanwhile, Rehoboam faced his own struggles in the southern kingdom of Judah. Now reduced in size, Judah centered its religious and political life around Jerusalem, where the Davidic dynasty continued, albeit on a smaller scale. The temple and traditional worship practices remained under Judah's authority, reinforcing the continuation of the covenant established with David. Rehoboam's rule in Judah was marked by both internal instability and external threats. Although he reigned for 17 years in Jerusalem, he faced continuous challenges in consolidating power and defending the kingdom from neighboring nations. After Rehoboam's death, his son Abijah ascended the throne, continuing the Davidic line in Jerusalem. In contrast, Jeroboam's rule in the northern kingdom lasted 22 years, but his legacy was marred by idolatry and disobedience. His choice to lead Israel away from God resulted in prophetic judgments. As foretold, Jeroboam's line faltered, with his son Nadab succeeding him but failing to secure a lasting dynasty. The northern kingdom, frequently led by kings who strayed from God, struggled under the weight of apostasy and rebellion, weakening its foundation. Ultimately, the northern kingdom endured only a few centuries. In 722 BC, the Assyrian Empire, led by King Shalmaneser V, besieged and captured Samaria, Israel's capital. The people of Israel were taken into exile and scattered among foreign nations, fulfilling the prophesied judgment against their unfaithfulness. The fall of Judah and the Babylonian captivity. While Israel had fallen to Assyria, the southern kingdom of Judah managed to survive a bit longer. However, its eventual fate was similar. Babylon rose as the dominant power, and in 586 BC, the Babylonian forces under King Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem. The sacred temple, the symbol of Judah's faith and identity, was destroyed, and many inhabitants were taken captive to Babylon. This marked the start of the Babylonian exile, a period of profound loss and displacement for the Jewish people. The Babylonian captivity was a time of deep despair in Israel's history. The destruction of Jerusalem and the people's exile signified the consequences of their disobedience. Yet, even in exile, God remained present. He raised up prophets such as Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel to guide, comfort, and warn the people. Jeremiah, known as the weeping prophet, had foretold the fall of Jerusalem and urged the people to submit to divine discipline. Meanwhile, Ezekiel and Daniel, both prophesying from within Babylon, delivered messages of hope and the promise of eventual restoration. One of the most profound and symbolic prophecies of this period was Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones, recorded in Ezekiel 37 verses 1 to 10. During the exile, when Israel's identity, faith, and future seemed threatened, this vision brought a powerful message of hope. Ezekiel, once a priest in Jerusalem, had been deported to Babylon during the initial Babylonian invasion in 597 BC. In Babylon, he transitioned from priest to prophet, receiving visions and messages for the exiled community. The exile was a direct consequence of Israel's disregard for the Mosaic covenant, which emphasized both blessings for obedience and warnings of punishment for disobedience. Israel's turn to idolatry and abandonment of God's commandments led to the destruction of Jerusalem and their exile. Yet, amid this bleak period, Ezekiel's vision of the dry bones offered a promise of renewal. The vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. In this vision, God transported Ezekiel to a valley filled with dry, lifeless bones, representing Israel's spiritual and national condition. The bones were scattered and desolate, a symbol of Israel's sense of hopelessness, separation from God, and loss of identity. When God asked Ezekiel, "Son of man, can these bones live?" Ezekiel humbly responded, "O sovereign Lord, you alone know." This response reflected Ezekiel's deep trust in God's power to bring life to what seemed beyond redemption. Following God's instruction, Ezekiel prophesied over the bones, proclaiming the word of the Lord. Miraculously, the bones began to come together, with tendons, flesh, and skin covering them. However, they remained lifeless until God commanded Ezekiel to call upon the breath, the spirit of life. As Ezekiel obeyed, the breath entered the bodies, and they stood up as a vast army, symbolizing the revitalization and rebirth of Israel. This vision conveyed a powerful message. Despite Israel's seemingly hopeless condition, God had the power to restore them, both physically and spiritually. The vision was a promise that God would bring the exiles back to their land, reviving their faith and re-establishing their identity as his people. God's declaration, "I will open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel," symbolized both a physical return from exile and a spiritual renewal for the nation. Nehemiah's mission to rebuild Jerusalem. Amidst the ruins and despair, Nehemiah emerged as a beacon of hope for Israel's restoration. Though he held a comfortable position as cupbearer to the Persian king, Nehemiah's heart remained with his people and his homeland. When he heard about the desolate state of Jerusalem, he was deeply moved. Rather than remaining indifferent, Nehemiah turned to God in fervent prayer, seeking guidance and strength. His story begins with a heartfelt prayer recorded in Nehemiah 1 verses 4 to 11, revealing his humble spirit and dedication to God's purpose. Upon learning of Jerusalem's dire condition, Nehemiah immediately sought God in repentance and intercession, confessing not only the sins of Israel, but also his own and his family's. This collective confession acknowledged that the destruction of Jerusalem was a direct result of Israel's disobedience. Nehemiah's prayer was filled with humility, beginning with praise for God's greatness and his faithfulness to the covenant. He then asked for mercy and favor before the Persian king, hoping to gain permission to return to Jerusalem and lead a rebuilding effort. Nehemiah's prayer was not just a plea for assistance, but also a commitment to action, reflecting his trust that any success would be possible only through God's intervention. God answered his prayer, and Nehemiah received the king's support to journey back to Jerusalem. When Nehemiah presented his request to King Artaxerxes, he received not only permission to return to Jerusalem, but also substantial support. The king provided letters of authorization for safe passage and materials necessary for the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls. Additionally, he supplied a military escort to ensure Nehemiah's safety during the journey. This unexpected favor was viewed as a clear sign of God's hand at work, orchestrating circumstances in Nehemiah's favor. Nehemiah was deeply aware that his mission was aligned with God's divine plan, and this strengthened his resolve. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, Nehemiah quickly faced significant challenges. The opposition was both external and internal, with notable adversaries such as Sanballat and Tobiah attempting to thwart the reconstruction. These enemies resorted to various tactics. They issued threats, plotted schemes, and sought to demoralize the people working on the walls. Yet, Nehemiah, guided by an unwavering faith and a clear sense of God's calling, remained steadfast. He effectively organized the people, assigning half to work on rebuilding while the other half stood guard, prepared to defend against any attacks. Despite these obstacles, the walls of Jerusalem were rebuilt in an astonishing 52 days, as noted in Nehemiah 6 verse 15. This rapid restoration was a powerful testament not only to Nehemiah's leadership, but also to God's faithfulness to his people. With the walls restored, Jerusalem once again stood as a fortified city, symbolizing hope, resilience, and God's enduring promises. A spiritual revival accompanies the physical restoration. The rebuilding of the city's walls was soon followed by a profound spiritual renewal. Ezra the scribe took a prominent role, leading a public reading of the Law of Moses. The people listened with reverence, deeply moved by the words that had guided their ancestors. This reading was followed by a collective act of repentance and a renewed commitment to God, solidifying the identity of the Israelites as a people in covenant with their Creator, even after the trauma of exile. Nehemiah's leadership extended beyond the physical restoration of Jerusalem's walls to a spiritual and social transformation within the community. He emphasized the importance of a strong spiritual foundation, recognizing that true strength came not just from fortified walls, but from faith and adherence to God's principles. Nehemiah inspired the people to study the scriptures, bringing them back to the core values of their faith and encouraging them to renew their covenant with God. Social reforms, addressing injustice and inequality. Beyond spiritual guidance, Nehemiah tackled social issues head-on. He confronted the exploitation of the vulnerable, particularly through the practice of usurious loans. Some wealthier individuals were charging excessive interest, leading others into crippling debt. Outraged by this injustice, Nehemiah swiftly addressed the problem. He publicly rebuked those responsible, demanding they return what they had unjustly taken from others. His decisive stance sent a clear message: exploitation and injustice would not be tolerated. Nehemiah's reforms went beyond addressing individual abuses. He also implemented changes to create a fairer society. He established measures to promote justice and equity, ensuring that the community's most vulnerable members were protected. His leadership brought about not only a physical and spiritual revival, but also a more just and compassionate society. The closing of the Old Testament and the silence before the Messiah. The narrative of Israel's restoration culminates with the messages of the post-exilic prophets, including Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. These prophets urged the people to remain steadfast in their faith and to continue walking in obedience to God. However, after the close of the Old Testament, there followed a period of approximately 400 years of prophetic silence. During this time, no new scriptures were added to the canon, and the voice of the prophets ceased. Though silent, this period was not without divine purpose. It was a time of preparation for the fulfillment of messianic prophecies and the coming of the Savior. As the centuries passed, the anticipation of the Messiah grew. The people of Israel awaited the one who would fulfill God's promises and bring redemption. This long period of waiting ended with the arrival of Jesus Christ. The New Testament opens with the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem, breaking the silence and inaugurating an era of hope and salvation for all humanity. Jesus, the promised Messiah, embodied the fulfillment of God's redemptive plan, bringing the light of redemption to a world in need. As we conclude this story, a question remains. Will you continue this journey with us? If you wish to explore the fulfillment of God's promises in the New Testament and discover how Jesus transformed lives with his message of love, redemption, and hope, we invite you to join us. Leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can continue delving into this extraordinary story that still inspires and changes lives today. May God's blessings be upon each of you. Thank you for watching, and stay close to God. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through the Old Testament. We've covered thousands of years, from the very first moments of creation to the stories of the patriarchs, the rise of kings, the trials of the prophets, and the exile and return of God's people. Every story we've encountered reminds us of the timeless lessons of faith, resilience, and God's unbreakable promises to his people. The Old Testament lays the foundation for what is to come, hinting at the arrival of a Savior who will fulfill God's redemptive plan for humanity. These ancient stories aren't just history. They're part of a larger tapestry that points to a future filled with hope and salvation. If you found this exploration meaningful, please take a moment to subscribe to Bible Stories, like the video, and share it with your friends, family, and church community. Let's spread the richness of these timeless stories far and wide. We invite you to continue this journey with us as we uncover even more incredible stories that connect the Old Testament to the life-changing message of the New Testament. Thank you for watching, and may God's blessings be with each and every one of you. Stay close to God, and see you in the next video.